The sanctuary is full when Michael walks through the heavy oak doors. Sunlight filters through stained glass, casting colored shadows across polished pews where families sit shoulder to shoulder. Pastor Samuel Daniels stands at the altar, mid-sermon, his voice carrying that practiced warmth that once made hundreds believe every word. Then he sees the young man walking down the center aisle. His face changes. The color drains completely. Michael's hands shake as he reaches beneath his jacket. The congregation notices the silence first, then the trembling figure approaching their beloved pastor. Michael stops 5 feet from the altar and whispers words that cut through the quiet like broken glass. "You ruined my mother's life, and mine." The gunshot that follows will echo far beyond these walls. For 15 years, Pastor Daniels believed he had buried his greatest sin deep enough that God himself might forget. But some secrets refuse to stay hidden, especially when they breathe, grow, and one day return carrying the weight of every destroyed life. This is the story of how one man's carefully constructed kingdom collapsed in a single moment, and how the son he never wanted became the reckoning he always deserved. Samuel Daniels didn't start as a monster. He grew up in rural Georgia, the youngest of 4 boys raised by a single mother who cleaned houses 6 days a week. His childhood was marked by poverty and absence. He found refuge in church, where his natural charisma and deep voice made him stand out. By 23, he was leading youth groups. By 30, he had founded his own congregation in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of Atlanta. People were drawn to him the way moths find light in darkness. The church grew faster than anyone expected. Within 5 years, they had moved into a proper building with capacity for 800. Daniels preached a gospel of redemption and second chances, speaking directly to those who felt abandoned by traditional religion. Sunday attendance swelled. Donation plates overflowed. Everything about Pastor Daniels suggested divine favor. His smile never wavered. His confidence never cracked. Deacon Thomas Harris joined the church in its 3rd year. He was a quiet man, 52 years old, with calloused hands from 30 years of construction work. His wife had passed from cancer 2 years earlier, leaving him to raise their only daughter alone. Elena was 15 when they first walked through those church doors, grief still fresh on both their faces. Deacon Harris found purpose in service. He trusted Pastor Daniels completely, the way lonely people trust anyone who offers them belonging. Elena joined the choir. Her voice was clear and unpolished, the kind that made people close their eyes when she sang. The church became their second home. Pastor Daniels took special interest in the Harris family, often pulling Deacon Harris aside after service to pray over struggles, to offer fatherly guidance. He told Elena she had a gift from God, that her voice could touch souls if properly nurtured. He offered private vocal coaching sessions in his office after Wednesday evening services. Deacon Harris thought this was kindness. Elena thought this was mentorship. Neither understood what was actually happening until it was far too late. Before we continue this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Elena turned 17 in March. That same month, she began acting differently. The change was subtle at first, easy to dismiss as normal teenage moodiness. She stopped volunteering for solo performances during service. She avoided eye contact with adults, including her father. Her appetite disappeared. She spent hours locked in her room. Deacon Harris wanted to believe her when she said everything was fine. Parents always want to believe their children are safe. By May, Elena had stopped attending church altogether. She claimed she was sick, exhausted, overwhelmed with schoolwork. Deacon Harris mentioned his concerns to Pastor Daniels, who nodded sympathetically and promised to pray for the family. Daniels suggested giving Elena space, letting her come back to faith on her own terms. It was advice that sounded wise but served only one purpose: keeping Elena isolated and silent while the secret growing inside her body became impossible to hide. The night Elena collapsed, Deacon Harris was preparing dinner. He heard a thud from upstairs, followed by silence heavy enough to stop his heart. He found her unconscious on the bathroom floor, her face paper white, her breathing shallow. At the hospital, doctors ran tests while Deacon Harris paced the waiting room, praying harder than he had since his wife's diagnosis. When the physician finally emerged, his expression carried something worse than tragedy. Elena was 3 months pregnant. She woke to find her father sitting beside her bed, his face aged 10 years in a single evening. The question hung between them unspoken until he finally gathered the courage to ask who had done this to his daughter. Elena stared at the white ceiling tiles and said nothing. The silence stretched for minutes. Finally, Elena turned her face toward the wall and whispered a name that shattered every foundation her father had built his life upon: Pastor Samuel Daniels. Deacon Harris didn't believe her at first. Couldn't believe her. But Elena's tears carried a weight that confusion couldn't explain. She told him everything then. The private sessions that lasted longer each week. The compliments that slowly shifted from spiritual to personal. The hand on her shoulder that lingered. The locked door. The promises that this was God's plan, that she was special, that no one would understand their connection. The threats that came later, when she tried to pull away. That night, Deacon Harris sat in his truck in the hospital parking lot until sunrise, trying to reconcile the man he trusted with the monster his daughter described. Everything he believed about the world required immediate reconstruction. By Monday morning, he had scheduled a meeting with the church elders. He brought medical records, his daughter's written statement, and a timeline of events that painted a picture too consistent to dismiss. Pastor Daniels was called in to respond. He denied everything with the precision of someone who had prepared for this moment. Elena was troubled, he said, grieving her mother, acting out for attention. The pregnancy was unfortunate, but to blame him was unconscionable. He suggested she was covering for a boyfriend. He reminded the elders of his years of service, his unblemished reputation. He called the accusation an attack from the enemy, designed to destroy everything they had built together. The elders were divided. 3 believed Deacon Harris immediately. 4 wanted more evidence, afraid to destroy a man's legacy on testimony alone. 2 privately sided with Pastor Daniels but publicly claimed neutrality. The meeting ended without resolution. The next Sunday, Pastor Daniels preached about false accusations and spiritual warfare. The congregation listened with divided hearts. Gossip spread faster than truth ever could. Elena tried to return to school but couldn't withstand the stares. Someone spray-painted words across her locker that made her father weep. She withdrew from public life entirely, spending her days in a bedroom that felt increasingly like a prison. Deacon Harris hired a private investigator with money he didn't have, desperate for proof that would make the truth undeniable. The investigator worked quietly for 3 weeks. What he uncovered suggested a pattern. 2 other families had left the church abruptly in previous years, refusing to explain why. The investigator tracked them down. One mother answered the phone and started crying before he could finish explaining why he was calling. Her daughter had been 16. The family had accepted a settlement to stay quiet and disappear. There had been others before that, the mother believed, though she had no proof. When the investigator presented his findings, some elders finally saw the truth clearly. Others doubled down on denial. The church split down the middle. Sunday attendance dropped by 40%. Pastor Daniels preached to dwindling crowds, his sermons growing increasingly desperate, increasingly focused on loyalty and faith through trials. Elena gave birth on a Tuesday in November. The labor lasted 14 hours. The baby boy emerged healthy, 7 pounds and 4 ounces, with dark curly hair and light brown skin. She named him Michael, after her grandfather. When Deacon Harris first held his grandson, he noticed immediately what everyone else would see. The baby looked exactly like Pastor Samuel Daniels. Daniels sent flowers to the hospital anonymously. Elena threw them in the trash. 2 days later, Daniels called from a blocked number, suggesting they meet privately to discuss a solution. He offered money. He offered help relocating to another state. He offered continued silence if they would simply disappear quietly. His tone carried no remorse, only calculation. Deacon Harris hung up mid-sentence. The legal route proved impossible. Prosecuting required evidence beyond testimony, and the physical evidence had long since disappeared. Daniels had been careful, meeting Elena only in private locations, never leaving documentation. The district attorney concluded that without DNA evidence or additional witnesses, conviction was unlikely. He suggested the family pursue civil action instead. But civil cases require money for lawyers that families like the Harrises simply didn't have. Anonymous notes began appearing on Pastor Daniels' desk around this time. The first said simply, "Sins don't stay buried." The second included a photo of Michael as a newborn. The third contained a Bible verse, "Be sure your sin will find you out." Daniels became convinced someone was watching him, following him, planning something. He installed security cameras. He varied his daily routines. His paranoia manifested in sermons that grew increasingly unhinged. Deacon Harris withdrew from church leadership but couldn't bring himself to leave entirely. He sat in the back row every Sunday, staring at Pastor Daniels with an expression that made others uncomfortable. He attended every board meeting uninvited, sitting silently in the corner, his presence a constant reminder of unresolved accusations. The tension became unbearable for everyone involved. 8 months after Michael's birth, Deacon Harris died. He collapsed at a construction site on a Thursday afternoon, clutching his chest. The official cause was massive heart attack. He was 54 years old. The doctor noted that stress could have been a contributing factor. Elena was 21, alone now except for an infant son, buried beneath grief that had never stopped accumulating. Pastor Daniels organized the funeral himself, delivering a eulogy praising Deacon Harris's dedication while carefully avoiding any mention of their final months together. He spoke about forgiveness, about moving forward, about letting God handle what humans cannot understand. Elena didn't attend. She sat at home holding Michael, staring at walls, wondering if her father would still be alive if she had simply stayed silent. No one requested an autopsy. The church paid for the burial. Pastor Daniels experienced a strange resurrection after Deacon Harris's death. Freed from his most persistent accuser, he rebuilt his reputation methodically. He hired a public relations consultant. He launched a podcast. He published a book about maintaining faith during persecution. Within 2 years, Sunday attendance had recovered completely. The church began planning an expansion. Elena deteriorated in inverse proportion to Daniel's success. She moved through days in a fog, performing basic tasks of motherhood without conscious awareness. She stopped answering phone calls. She ignored mail. Bills went unpaid until utilities were shut off. Social services enrolled her in therapy while arranging financial assistance. Michael stayed with her, but barely. The caseworker visited weekly, documenting slow improvement that stopped short of actual healing. Michael grew up understanding that his mother was broken, but not why. He was a quiet child, observant, intelligent, with eyes that tracked adult conversations with uncomfortable intensity. He learned early to care for himself, to recognize when his mother was having a bad day. He knew his grandfather had died before he could remember. He knew his father wasn't in the picture. He didn't know why, only that asking questions made his mother's face collapse in ways that terrified him. The anonymous notes to Pastor Daniels stopped for years, then resumed when Michael turned 7. This time they said, "He's growing." Then, "He looks like you." Then, "How long until he asks questions?" Daniels increased security again, hiring an off-duty police officer to monitor the church. The notes kept coming anyway. Whoever was sending them had access to every space Daniels occupied. Daniels began unraveling slowly, privately, in ways only those closest to him noticed. His sermons changed. Where he once preached about love and redemption, he now focused obsessively on judgment, punishment, and divine retribution. He spoke about demons walking among the faithful, about the necessity of rooting out evil before it spread. Some congregation members found the shift inspiring. Others felt increasingly uncomfortable. Attendance began declining again. Michael turned 13 and started asking questions his mother couldn't answer without falling apart. Who was his father? Why didn't he have grandparents? Elena tried responding once and ended up sobbing on the kitchen floor for an hour. Michael stopped asking her directly. Instead, he started researching on his own, piecing together fragments from overheard conversations, from old documents in his mother's closet, from internet searches. He found a photo first, buried in a box at the back of his mother's closet. Elena in a choir robe, younger than Michael had ever seen her, standing beside a man in pastoral vestments. The man's face stopped Michael cold. He looked in the bathroom mirror for comparison. The same nose, the same chin. Michael stared at that photo for an hour, understanding clicking into place like puzzle pieces that hurt to connect. Elena told him everything that night. Not because she wanted to, but because the alternative was letting him construct the truth from fragments, which would be worse. She spoke in a flat monotone, delivering facts like reading a grocery list. The only way she could get through it. Michael listened without interrupting. 13 years old, sitting at the kitchen table, learning that his father was a predator, that his conception was an act of violence. When Elena finished, Michael asked only one question. Where is he now? Pastor Samuel Daniels was thriving. His church had expanded into a second location. His book was selling steadily. He had been invited to speak at conferences. He appeared on Christian radio programs. He smiled in photos, shook hands, signed books. He slept 4 hours a night, consumed by nightmares he told no one about. The notes kept arriving, though he had stopped reading them. He burned them immediately, but somehow always knew what they said anyway. Michael started attending Pastor Daniel's church when he turned 15. He showed up alone one Sunday, sitting in the back row, watching the man who had destroyed his family perform righteousness for an audience that believed every word. No one knew who he was. He returned the following week, and the week after that. By the 3rd month, people recognized him as a regular. By the 6th month, they knew his name. He volunteered for setup crew. He smiled when appropriate. Inside, he was memorizing every detail, every routine, every moment of vulnerability. Elena's mental health collapsed completely when she discovered Michael had been attending that church. She tried to stop him, screaming things that didn't make sense, throwing objects. Michael held her until she exhausted herself, then continued going anyway. He told himself he needed to understand who his father really was. The rest of the truth was darker, growing in the space between his ribs where rage lived. A former church elder reached out to Michael when he was 17. The man had left the congregation years earlier, unable to reconcile what he knew with continued participation. He had watched Michael from a distance, recognized something in his face, and put pieces together. He invited Michael to coffee and told him everything the church had tried to bury. The other victims, the settlements, the pattern of predatory behavior that had been enabled and protected. The elder gave Michael documents, recorded conversations, evidence that had been gathered but never used. Michael spent his 18th birthday reading through files that proved his father was exactly the monster his mother had described. He spent his 19th birthday planning. Not impulsively, not in rage, but carefully, thoughtfully, with cold calculation that only comes from years of accumulated pain. He understood this would cost him his freedom, possibly his life. He also understood that some truths only speak through action, that some silences only break through violence. Elena suffered a complete psychotic break in the weeks before Michael turned 19. She stopped recognizing him, stopped recognizing anyone. She wandered the house talking to people who weren't there, having conversations with her dead father. Michael called the caseworker. Elena was hospitalized and transferred to a long-term psychiatric facility. Standing in her empty bedroom, Michael felt something inside him finalize. He had nothing left to protect. The only thing left was the truth, and the only way to deliver it was through an act no one could ignore. He bought the gun from a private seller at a gun show. He practiced at a range until his hands stopped shaking when he pulled the trigger. He wrote letters explaining everything, sealed them, and left them with a friend. He visited his mother one final time in the psychiatric ward. She didn't recognize him. She called him Thomas, her father's name, and asked if he was proud of her. Michael said yes and kissed her forehead goodbye. Sunday morning arrived with clear skies. The church filled steadily between 9 and 9:30. Pastor Samuel Daniels prepared in his office, reviewing sermon notes, sipping coffee. He had no sense of what was coming. He walked onto that stage believing the past was successfully buried. He believed wrong. Michael entered through the main doors at 9:40. He wore a dark jacket despite the warm weather. He walked slowly down the center aisle while Pastor Daniels spoke about redemption. Several people noticed the young man approaching. No one saw danger until it was far too late. Michael stopped 5 feet from the altar. Daniels looked up from his Bible, made eye contact, and in that instant knew exactly who was standing before him. The color drained from his face. Michael's voice carried through the sanctuary with perfect clarity. "You ruined my mother's life, and mine." Daniel stepped backward, hands raised, beginning to form words that would have been lies or pleas or both. Michael pulled the gun from beneath his jacket. Screams erupted from every direction. Michael's hand was steady. The gun fired once. Pastor Samuel Daniels collapsed behind the pulpit, blood spreading across his white shirt in a pattern that looked almost like wings. Michael lowered the weapon immediately. He didn't run. He stood completely still, staring at the body, waiting for police who were already being called. The congregation descended into chaos, people running for exits, others frozen in shock. Michael felt nothing in that moment. No satisfaction, no remorse, no fear. Just a vast emptiness where all his rage had lived. He had done the thing he came to do. Everything after was just consequence. Police arrived within 4 minutes. They found Michael standing exactly where he had fired the shot, gun on the ground at his feet, hands raised. He offered no resistance. When asked why he had killed Pastor Daniels, he said only, "He knows what he did." The officers handcuffed him and led him out through a side door. The trial took place 6 months later. Michael's defense attorney argued for manslaughter based on extreme emotional disturbance. The prosecution pushed for first-degree murder. The courtroom heard testimony from Elena's doctors, from the former elder who had provided Michael with evidence, from former congregation members who described Pastor Daniels' pattern of abuse. The jury heard recordings, read documents, saw photos of Elena in her psychiatric facility. They listened to Michael's own testimony, delivered in a flat monotone. He showed no emotion. He expressed no regret. The jury deliberated for 3 days. They returned with a verdict of second-degree murder. The judge sentenced Michael to 20 years with possibility of parole after 12. Before sentencing, the judge made a statement about understanding how trauma creates violence, but maintaining that violence cannot be the answer. Michael listened without reaction. When asked if he had anything to say, he spoke for the first time with something approaching emotion. "My mother spent 15 years in prison because of what he did to her. Her prison just didn't have bars. At least mine has a release date." The church never recovered. The trial brought every buried accusation back to light. Former members came forward with their own stories now that the man who had silenced them was dead. A full investigation revealed that church leadership had known about allegations for years, had paid settlements, had moved problem volunteers rather than report them to authorities. The building was eventually sold to pay legal settlements. Pastor Samuel Daniels' books were pulled from distribution. His legacy became a cautionary tale. Elena remains in psychiatric care. She has occasional moments of clarity, during which she asks about her son. She doesn't fully understand what happened. The staff tells her he's busy, that he'll come when he can. During her unclear moments, she talks to her father's ghost and apologizes for things that were never her fault. Michael writes to her weekly from prison. She doesn't read the letters, but the staff keeps them in a box in case she ever can. Michael becomes eligible for parole at age 31. If released, he will face significant challenges. His criminal record will make employment difficult. His lack of family support will make housing unstable. His name is permanently associated with a highly publicized murder. He knows this. He accepted these consequences when he walked into that church with a loaded gun. The question of justice remains unanswered because it cannot be answered definitively. Was Michael's action justified? Does systematic failure to protect victims create a right to violent intervention? The legal system gave one answer. Your conscience might give another. There is no resolution that returns Elena her sanity, Deacon Harris his life, or Michael his freedom. There is only the aftermath. Some truths only speak through violence. That statement is both dangerous and, in certain contexts, historically accurate. Systems of power protect themselves instinctively. They silence accusers, destroy evidence, rehabilitate predators, and continue functioning as if justice had been served. Pastor Daniels manipulated a religious system designed to trust its leaders. He used faith as a weapon and Scripture as a shield. He harmed children in God's name. He was protected by people who valued institutional stability over individual suffering. Michael's bullet was the period at the end of a sentence the legal system never finished writing. But violence as justice creates its own problems. Michael is now in prison, his potential contributions limited. Elena lost her son alongside everything else. Other victims saw the man who harmed them killed, but received no healing from his death. The congregation fragmented. Children witnessed a murder in church. If the measure of justice is reduction of harm, then Michael's action fails. If the measure is ensuring consequences reach those who evade them through power, then perhaps it succeeds. The answer depends on which value you prioritize. What remains undeniable is that silence enables predators. Every person who suspected something about Pastor Daniels but said nothing, every elder who chose institutional preservation over investigation, every congregation